From The Australian, here's What's on the Front. I'm Kristen Amiot. It's Thursday, October 31. The Prime Minister is denying having called Alan Joyce to request flight upgrades as pressure mounts on Anthony Albanese to refer himself to the National Anti-Corruption Commission over allegations he benefited from a close relationship with the former Qantas boss. New South Wales Aboriginal land councils have called for amendments to heritage laws that would enshrine their authority in legislation. It comes after a controversial decision by Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek to block a gold mine in Blaney on contested Indigenous heritage grounds. Those stories are live right now at theaustralian.com.au. Australia is in the grips of a housing crisis, and the major parties are struggling to come up with policy that gives first home buyers and renters a fair go. In today's episode, why a new alliance is taking a grassroots approach to housing policy.
This is the laundry, similar to what I've got now. There's a lot more stuff in it.
This is me at one of the dozens of property inspections I've embarked upon over the last year.
Here, a little study nook, which I could make into my office.
I remember this apartment distinctly. One bedroom with a study nook and no parking.
And this is the bedroom. Lots of storage in here. And they've got a dresser. And then opens onto a really big balcony.
But it's not the floor plan that made it memorable. Nope, I remember this apartment because it's how I learned the hard way that you can't get emotionally invested if you don't want your little first home buyer heart to be broken.
It is amazing. These opportunities are hard to find. So ladies and gentlemen, where do we open the bidding?
That apartment, one bedroom with a windowless study nook and no parking, sold at auction for about $200,000 above the price guide, well out of my range and the reach of millions of Australians just like me.
10,910,000, hammer goes up, all silent, all done, selling. Sold, sir, congratulations.
But over the last year, I've persevered, queuing alongside couples with dual incomes and first home buyers backed by their parents to inspect smaller and smaller properties that ultimately sell for more and more over the price guides given by sellers. I've watched in horror as Sydney's median home price soars to astronomical levels, while my borrowing capacity inexplicably declines. I've made concessions as a 20% deposit gets further and further out of reach. I've watched my credit rating suffer as 90-day pre-approvals lapse in the blink of an eye. I made some headway with a high-interest savings account and then despaired as I handed almost every single cent of the bonus interest I'd earned over to the tax department. I've seriously considered stashing what's left under my mattress for the rest of this financial year in hopes my prospects will improve, though at this point, I'm not confident. And I'm not the only one.
In July and August, Amplify conducted polling of 4,000 Australians, and that revealed that 95% of people rank housing availability and affordability among their top priority issues.
Jeff Chambers is The Australian's chief political correspondent.
The polling also showed that trust in politicians and governments and their handling of housing policy has never been lower. And some of that could probably be linked to the COVID pandemic, the rise of social media. But the polling clearly shows that Australians want to have a proper say in the development of housing policy.
Housing policy is shaping up to be a key election issue, and it could even decide who wins government in early 2025.
So Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton at a federal government level are at polar opposites when it comes to housing policy and those spillover areas such as migration, superannuation for housing, associated infrastructure and taxes. This issue with housing has been a long time coming, and it encompasses all three tiers of government: local, state, and federal. It has never really traditionally been the domain of a federal government for the Commonwealth to take carriage of housing policy and associated taxes, community infrastructure and such. But it has gotten so bad at a local government level in particular, and you've got different taxes, different approaches to stamp duty, different priorities, different first home buyer schemes that have just changed and morphed over the years. The other really big issue here, and particularly in recent years, has been this record surge in migration. And this is where the Commonwealth does have a role. So there's a lot of flip sides when it comes to housing. Now, in terms of a federal response through national cabinet and such, it hasn't worked. Both sides, but in particular the Albanese government, are putting up these tens of billion-dollar programs talking about unlocking supply, but there's very little evidence or proof that's going to happen anytime soon. So big money from all sides of politics, big promises, and then this sort of chasm. We're about 5 or 6 months out from the next federal election, and really the politics around housing has never been so toxic and divisive.
Now, a nonpartisan alliance of business, social and youth leaders are backing a grassroots approach to housing policy reform. The group, known as Amplify, is the brainchild of SEEK co-founder Paul Bassat and former Commonwealth public servant Georgina Harrisson. On its board is former New South Wales Premier Dominic Perrottet, Tabcorp Chief Executive Gillan McLachlan, and Bunnings Managing Director Michael Schneider, among others.
It's not an aligned think tank or a politically linked group, and its purpose and the ambition of it is seeking to harness people power and draw on real-life experiences of normal Australians to feed into policy development that is completely separate from the political process. And their idea is that they'll have online and in-person forums across the country over the coming months, and that process will culminate in February next year when they randomly select a diverse group of 100 Australians to assemble in Sydney for the first amplification event, and that will be solely focused on housing. Amplify will provide access to a range of independent experts, and they'll help punters guide their ideas into policy development. And once they get to that endpoint where they land on a range of policy platforms, Amplify will then make those representations and publicly promote what Australians, normal Australians, want and believe that the government should be doing in relation to housing.
Experts like Jeff are speculating that an election will be called for March or April of next year. So isn't that cutting things a bit fine?
It is, but quite often you can maximise your effect if you're unveiling, announcing, launching, agitating in policy areas right in the thrust of a campaign. It's not to say that an incoming government or a political party who is interested in some of the ideas that are developed won't pick those up, maybe look at those post-election, or potentially feed them into policies of their own that might align with what this process provides, and that all tiers of government and all politicians from every party will be able to very clearly see what the people are thinking and some of their ideas put forward.
Coming up, the major parties make their pitch for the roof over your head. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has donned a whole lot of hard hats and high vis lately. He's been out and about spruiking Labor's multi-pronged solution to the housing crisis.
This is a fantastic project. So close to amenity, so close to facilities. It's an example of what we want to achieve.
One part is called the Housing Australia Future Fund, and it's worth $10 billion. It was passed into legislation at the end of last year. The goal there is to build 20,000 new social homes and 10,000 new affordable homes across the country over 5 years. There's also a $3 billion new home bonus, which funnels funding to states and territories that build more than their share of the government's 1.2 million new home goal. Plus, there are $500 million grants available to connect essential services to new housing developments. But the Australian's reporting shows a good chunk of those funds are tied up in bureaucracy, and that means the government is likely to fall short of its lofty housing goals. On the flip side, the coalition says it will use a $5 billion use it or lose it infrastructure fund to build 500,000 new homes around the country. The cash would be granted to local councils and state and territory-owned providers to build infrastructure like water, power, sewerage and access roads, but rescinded if the work doesn't make progress after 12 months. And if it wins the next election, the opposition has promised to freeze changes to the National Construction Code for a decade to protect families from red tape and the growing costs of evolving energy efficiency standards.
The other really big issues, I think, for both sides is getting those migration settings right, because a lot of migrants are filling jobs that Australians don't want to do and where we have shortages. And then on the flip side of that, the construction sector is suffering crippling skilled shortages as well, and costs for suppliers at a really high level. And there's big delays on projects because you can't get tradespeople in and things are blowing out. And I think demand is one issue, but I do think we need to have enough houses, and I think people need to be realistic about where they want to live. And so many people, including migrants, want to live in the cities, and I don't see either side really coming up with a clear solution on that at this point.
Jeff Chambers is the Australian's chief political correspondent. You can read all his reporting on Australia's housing crisis right now at theaustralian.com.au.